I remember the exact moment my life split into before and after. It was a Thursday night in late September, rain hammering against the windows of our small house in rural Indiana like it wanted to break through. The television blared with the sounds of a football game that Frank pretended to watch. Though I knew he was really just nursing his fifth beer of the evening and stewing in whatever fresh resentment had taken root in his mind that day, I should have known something bad was coming. I had learned to read the signs over the years, the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was watching, the particular shade of red his face turned when the alcohol mixed with his anger, the dangerous quiet that settled over him like a storm cloud. Leo was only 6 years old then, small for his age, with my dark hair and eyes that seemed too wise for a child. He had been playing quietly on the living room floor, arranging his toy cars in neat rows the way he always did when he sensed tension in the house. He was such a careful child, always trying to be invisible, always trying not to upset anyone. It broke my heart every single day to see how fear had already shaped him into something cautious and small. That night, Leo reached for his cup of water on the coffee table. His small hand misjudged the distance, and the cup tipped over, sending water cascading across the surface and soaking the stack of papers Frank had left there. They were bills, I think. Or maybe notices about the mortgage payment we had already missed twice. The water spread quickly, turning the papers into a soggy mess. The room went silent except for the television. Even the rain seemed to pause. Frank's head turned slowly toward Leo, and I felt my stomach drop. I knew that look. I had seen it directed at me countless times, but never quite like this at our son. "What did you just do?" Frank's voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if he had yelled. He stood up from his chair, and I saw Leo shrink back, his little body curling in on itself. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Leo whispered, his voice shaking. "It was an accident." "An accident." Frank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're just like your mother. Useless. Can't do anything right. Just breaking things and making messes." I stepped forward then, putting myself between Frank and Leo. "It was just water, Frank. I'll clean it up. It's not a big deal." But it was too late. Frank had already decided that someone needed to pay for whatever imaginary slight the universe had dealt him that day. He walked past me into the garage, and I heard him rummaging around. My heart hammered in my chest. When he came back, he was holding a small wooden rod, maybe a piece of leftover lumber or an old ruler. His face was set in that expression I had come to dread, the one that said he had made a decision and nothing would change his mind. "Come here, boy," he said to Leo. Leo looked at me with eyes full of terror, and I saw my own fear reflected back at me. "Frank, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's just a child. It was an accident." Frank ignored me completely. He grabbed Leo's arm and yanked him forward. The crack of wood against Leo's shin was sharp and sudden, echoing through the room like a gunshot. Leo screamed, a sound of pure pain that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. Something inside me snapped. I didn't think. I just moved. I threw myself at Frank, pushing him hard enough that he stumbled backward. "Don't touch him!" I screamed. "Don't you dare touch him! You're insane! You're a monster!" Leo was crying, clutching his leg, and I wanted to go to him, but I couldn't take my eyes off Frank. His face had gone from red to almost purple. I had never directly challenged him like this before. I had taken his abuse for years, telling myself it was better that it was me than Leo, that I could handle it, that if I just tried harder to be a better wife, he would change. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother, Carol, sitting in her armchair by the window. She had been living with us for 2 years, ever since Dad died. She sat there knitting, her needles clicking away steadily, and she didn't even look up. "Carol," I said, my voice breaking, "are you really going to just sit there?" She finally raised her eyes to mine, and the coldness I saw there was like a physical blow. "Sarah, don't make this worse than it already is," she said calmly, as if we were discussing what to have for dinner. "He's just disciplining the boy. Children need discipline. I disciplined you the same way, and you turned out fine." "Fine?" I felt hysterical laughter bubbling up in my throat. "You think this is fine?" "Shut your mouth," Carol said, her voice sharp now. "You've always been too soft, too emotional. That's your problem." I turned back to Frank, and the words poured out of me like poison that had been building up for years. "You're a failure," I spat at him. "You lost your job because you're incompetent. You drink away what little money we have. You're a pathetic excuse for a father and a husband. You're nothing but a bully who feels powerful by hurting people smaller than you." The silence that followed was absolute. Frank's expression changed, became almost blank, and that scared me more than his anger. Without a word, he turned and walked back into the garage. Carol looked at me with something like satisfaction in her eyes. "You never knew when to keep quiet, did you?" she whispered. "Always running your trashy mouth." When Frank came back, he was holding a tube of industrial adhesive, the kind used in construction, the kind that bonded permanently. I saw it, and my blood turned to ice. "Frank, what are you—" He didn't let me finish. He moved faster than I expected, grabbing me by the throat with one hand and forcing me down to the floor. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but he was so much stronger. I heard Leo screaming, "Mommy! Mommy!" somewhere behind me. Frank forced my head back, his hand tight around my throat, cutting off my air. With his other hand, he opened the tube and squeezed the adhesive directly onto my lips. The chemical smell was overwhelming. It burned immediately, a searing pain that made me want to scream, but I couldn't open my mouth. He smeared it roughly across my lips, the excess getting into my hair, on my cheeks. The pain was indescribable, like my skin was being dissolved. Leo launched himself at Frank, his small fist beating against Frank's back, his teeth sinking into Frank's arm. Frank cursed and shoved Leo away hard enough that the boy hit the wall. Then Frank stood up, looking down at me with disgust. I couldn't breathe through my mouth. The adhesive had sealed my lips shut completely. I could only manage short, desperate breaths through my nose, and every attempt to open my mouth sent fresh waves of burning agony through my face. I made sounds, desperate animal sounds of pain and fear, but no words could come out. Frank wiped his hands on his jeans and walked calmly back to his chair. He picked up his beer and settled in to watch the rest of the game. "Much more peaceful now," he said to no one in particular. Carol resumed her knitting. Leo crawled over to me crying, trying to help, but there was nothing he could do. I wrapped my arms around him as best I could, pulling him close, both of us shaking on the floor while Frank watched television and my mother's knitting needles clicked their steady rhythm. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't lie down without feeling like I was suffocating. I sat in the bathroom with the door locked, looking at my reflection in the mirror. My lips were grotesquely swollen, covered in dried adhesive mixed with blood where the skin had torn. My face was streaked with tears. I hadn't even realized I was crying. But something had shifted inside me. As I stared at that ruined face, I didn't feel broken. I felt furious. I felt clear-headed for the first time in years. This was not love. This was not family. This was a prison, and I had been my own jailer, making excuses, believing that I deserved this somehow, that I could fix things if I just tried harder. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and took pictures. My swollen, sealed lips, the bruise forming on Leo's shin, the tube of adhesive Frank had left in the bathroom trash, the wooden rod he had tossed in the corner of the living room. I uploaded them all to a cloud storage account I created right there, using an email address Frank didn't know about. Then I started planning. The next morning, I went to the bathroom and began the agonizing process of removing the adhesive. I had to do it slowly, carefully, using warm water and oil, but mostly I just had to pull. The pain was excruciating. Pieces of skin came away with the glue, leaving raw, bleeding patches. But I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just watched myself in the mirror and promised that this would be the last time anyone did this to me. Over the following weeks, I became a ghost of myself. I was quiet, obedient, almost eerily compliant. I cooked Frank's favorite meals. I cleaned the house until it gleamed. I never argued, never contradicted, never showed any emotion beyond mild pleasantness. Frank and Carol thought they had won. I could see the satisfaction in their faces. Carol even said to me one afternoon, "See? Wasn't it better to just learn your place? Things are so much nicer when you're not causing drama." I smiled and nodded and said nothing. But in the hours when they weren't watching, I was working. I used cash I had been secretly saving from grocery money over the years to buy a tiny recording device and a hidden camera disguised as a button. I sewed the button onto a throw pillow in the living room, positioned perfectly to capture Frank's usual spot on the couch. Frank had a side business that I had known about for years but never spoken of. He sold auto parts, but they weren't always acquired legally. Sometimes he would come home with boxes of parts that he said had fallen off a truck. He would make phone calls late at night to people I didn't know, arranging sales, discussing prices. I had never paid much attention before. Now, I recorded everything. I also captured something even more damning. One night, when Leo refused to eat his dinner because his stomach hurt, Frank leaned in close to him and said, very quietly, "You better eat every bite, boy. Or I'll lock you in the basement with the rats, just like I did with your mother when she was a girl and wouldn't mind." My blood ran cold. I had never told anyone about the basement. About being locked down there in the dark for hours when I was Leo's age, listening to things scurrying in the corners, crying until my throat was raw. Carol had done that to me, and apparently, she had told Frank about it like it was just another parenting technique to pass down. I had it all on video now. Frank's threat, Leo's terrified face. And when I zoomed in later, you could see Carol in the background, watching, doing nothing. I couldn't go to the police directly. I had tried that once, years ago, after Frank had broken my wrist. Carol had lied for him, said I had fallen down the stairs. Frank had been charming and concerned at the station, playing the worried husband so well that the officers had believed him over me. I knew I needed something they couldn't ignore, couldn't explain away. I needed someone on my side first. Mrs. Henderson lived 3 houses down. She was in her 70s, a widow who tended her garden with the care most people reserved for children. I had seen her watching our house sometimes, concern creasing her face. She had tried to talk to me a few times, asking if everything was all right, but I had always smiled and lied. One afternoon, I walked to her house with a basket, asking to borrow some sugar. As she measured it out in her sunny kitchen, I slipped a piece of paper across the counter. "Please don't read this until I leave," I whispered. "And please don't call the police yet, but I need you to keep something safe for me." Her eyes met mine, and I saw understanding there. She nodded slightly, palming the note. "Of course, dear." The note explained briefly what was happening. I asked her to hold onto a USB drive I had taped under her mailbox. It contained copies of everything I had gathered. Insurance, in case something happened to me. After I left, I saw her curtains twitch as she watched me walk home. When I glanced back, she was standing in her window, and she raised her hand in a small, determined wave. I found a women's shelter online, using the computer at the public library. I called them from a payphone near the grocery store, explaining my situation in a voice that shook despite my best efforts. The woman on the other end, her name was Grace. She listened to everything and then said simply, "We'll help you. When you're ready to leave, we'll be there." We set a plan. Sunday morning, Frank and Carol always went to church on Sundays. They were very devout in public, sitting in the front pew, participating in every hymn, playing the role of a wholesome family. The irony was almost funny. I told Grace the plan, and she agreed. A car would pick up Leo and me at a spot 2 blocks from the house at exactly 10:15, while Frank and Carol were surrounded by their church community. Mrs. Henderson was essential. I walked to her house the Saturday before, ostensibly to return a cup of flour I had borrowed. In her kitchen, I explained what was going to happen. "I need you to delay them," I said. "Tomorrow after church. Invite them for tea. Keep them at your house for as long as you can." Mrs. Henderson's jaw was set firm. "I'll keep them there for hours if I have to," she said. "I've suspected for a long time, dear. I just didn't know how to help. I'm so glad you're getting out." Sunday morning arrived, bright and clear. I dressed Leo carefully, packing a backpack with his favorite toys, some clothes, and the stuffed rabbit he had slept with since he was a baby. I packed my own bag with documents, the USB drive with copies of all my evidence, medication, and a few pieces of clothing. Frank was in a good mood that morning, whistling as he got ready for church. Carol reminded me to make sure Leo looked presentable. I smiled and nodded, just like I had been doing for weeks. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed our bags and Leo's hand. "We're going on an adventure," I told him, keeping my voice light even though my heart was hammering. "We have to be very quick and very quiet, okay?" His eyes were wide, but he nodded. He had learned not to ask too many questions. We walked quickly through the neighborhood, taking a route that avoided the main streets. Every car that passed made me flinch, certain it was Frank coming back, having somehow discovered our plan. But we made it to the meeting point, a small park where Grace was waiting in a nondescript sedan. "Sarah?" she asked, and I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. She opened the back door. "Get in, you're safe now." As we drove away, I watched the neighborhood disappear behind us. Leo sat next to me, clutching my hand. "Are we really leaving, Mommy?" he whispered. "Yes, baby," I said, and finally let myself cry. "We're really leaving." The shelter was in another town, an hour away. It was a plain building that could have been anything from the outside, which was the point. Grace showed us to a small room with 2 beds, a bathroom, and a window that had bars on it for safety. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer named Mr. Davis. He was provided by the shelter, worked with domestic violence cases. I showed him everything I had gathered, the photos, the videos, the recordings. He watched it all in silence, his expression growing grimmer with each piece of evidence. When the recording from the night Frank glued my mouth shut played, with Leo's screams and Carol's cold voice saying, "Shut your trashy mouth, mister." Davis sat back in his chair and took off his glasses. "Sarah," he said quietly, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases I've seen. We have documented child abuse, assault, evidence of illegal activity, and criminal conspiracy. You've built an airtight case. What happens now?" I asked. "Now, we make sure you and Leo are safe. Then we make sure those people never hurt you again." Frank discovered we were gone around 2 in the afternoon. Mrs. Henderson told me later that she had invited them for tea right after church, just as planned. She served them cake and coffee and asked Frank endless questions about his opinions on various topics, which he loved. Carol had seemed impatient, but Frank was enjoying the attention. When they finally left and went home, Mrs. Henderson said she heard Frank's roar of rage from 3 houses away. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. I had kept my old number on purpose, as part of the plan. Frank called 17 times in a row, each voicemail more furious than the last. He called me every name he could think of. He promised to find me. He promised to take Leo away from me forever. Then Carol's messages started. These were different. She posted on Facebook, on community groups, on the church page. Her posts showed pictures of Leo and me, with captions about how her troubled daughter had kidnapped her grandson and how the family was desperately worried about us. She painted herself as a concerned grandmother and Frank as a devoted father, both frantic about our safety. The comments flooded in with sympathy and promises to watch for us. I watched it happen from the shelter, feeling sick, but, Mr. Davis told me not to worry. Let them, he said. Let them show everyone who they are. Every threat, every lie, it all helps our case. The next day, Mr. Davis sent the recording of Frank's illegal business dealings anonymously to the local police. Within 48 hours, Frank was being investigated. They obtained a warrant and searched the house, finding more evidence than even I knew about. Stolen parts, fraudulent documents, a notebook with transactions going back years. Frank was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Carol called the shelter somehow, managed to get through to my room. How could you do this? She screamed at me. He's your father. I'm your mother. This is family. You don't destroy family. Family doesn't do what you did to me, I said, my voice steady. Family doesn't hurt children. Family doesn't glue their daughter's mouth shut and call it discipline. You're being dramatic, Carol snapped. We were teaching you lessons, making you stronger. No, I said. You were torturing us, and now you're going to face the consequences. She tried to argue more, but I hung up. Mr. Davis had warned me not to engage, but I needed to say those words to her. I needed her to hear them. The court case took months to build. In the meantime, Leo and I lived at the shelter, then in a transitional apartment. I enrolled Leo in therapy, where he slowly began to open up about the things he had seen and experienced. I started therapy too, working through years of abuse that I had normalized and buried. I also started taking online classes, picking up the degree I had abandoned when I got pregnant with Leo. Frank had always said college was a waste for me, that I wasn't smart enough. Every assignment I completed felt like an act of rebellion. When the court date finally arrived, I was ready. Frank and Carol showed up dressed in their Sunday best, playing their roles perfectly. Carol cried delicately into a handkerchief. Frank looked appropriately concerned and confused, the picture of a wronged father. Their lawyer painted me as unstable, vengeful, a bad mother who was keeping a child from his loving family. He talked about how I had stolen Leo in the middle of the night, how I had manufactured evidence to hurt them. Then it was our turn. Mr. Davis stood up calmly. He had a projector set up. The first thing he showed was the photo of my face the morning after, my lips raw and bleeding from the adhesive. The courtroom went silent. Then he played the video from that night. The sound quality was perfect. You could hear everything. Leo screaming as Frank hit him. Me yelling, "Don't touch him! You're insane!" Frank's heavy breathing as he forced me down. The wet sound of the adhesive tube being opened. And then, crystal clear, Carol's voice, "Shut your trashy mouth." The defense lawyer was on his feet, objecting, but the judge silenced him with a wave. We watched the entire thing. When it ended, the courtroom was absolutely silent. Mr. Davis then showed the video of Frank threatening to lock Leo in the basement with the rats, just like he had done to me. He presented the evidence of Frank's illegal business. He showed my medical records from the time Frank broke my wrist, the police report where Carol had lied. He called Mrs. Henderson to the stand. She testified about what she had seen over the years, the times she had seen me with bruises, the way Leo always seemed frightened, the night she heard screaming from our house. By the time Mr. Davis finished presenting our case, Frank's face had gone from confident to ashen. Carol sat perfectly still, her mask finally cracking, showing the panic underneath. The judge asked if I wanted to say anything. I stood up, my legs shaking, and looked at Frank and Carol directly. "You told me I was worthless," I said. "You told me I was stupid, that I was trash, that I deserved everything you did to me. You taught me that love meant accepting pain, that family meant swallowing my voice and my dignity. You tried to teach my son the same lessons." I paused, feeling tears running down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. "But you were wrong. I am worth something. My son is worth something. And we deserve better than you. We deserve safety. We deserve kindness. We deserve to live without fear." I sat back down. Leo, who was sitting in the back with his therapist, gave me a small, brave smile. The verdict came down hard. Frank was convicted on multiple charges: child abuse, assault, operating an illegal business, and several other counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Carol was found guilty as an accomplice and received a suspended sentence with mandatory anger management and parenting classes, though since she would never have access to children again, it was more symbolic than anything. The restraining order was permanent. Neither of them could contact Leo or me ever again. The house was seized as part of the criminal investigation into Frank's business. 6 months after the trial, Leo and I stood in our new apartment in a different city. It was small, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old building, but it was ours. The walls were painted a soft yellow. There were plants on the windowsill that I was learning to keep alive. Leo's drawings covered the refrigerator. I had a job now, working at a local library while finishing my degree online. It didn't pay much, But it was enough. More importantly, it was mine. I had earned it. No one could take it away from me by telling me I wasn't good enough. Leo was in first grade at a school where the teachers knew his history and watched out for him with extra care. He was still in therapy, still working through his trauma, but he laughed now. He played. He didn't flinch when I raised my hand to brush his hair back. That afternoon, I took him to the park near our apartment. He ran ahead of me to the swings, his backpack bouncing, and I watched him play with other children, saw him smile freely. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Davis. The subject line read, "Final update." I opened it, my heart beating faster. The email confirmed that all appeals had been exhausted. Frank's sentence was final. Carol was forbidden from attempting any contact. The legal battle was over. We had won. I stood there in the autumn sunshine, watching my son play, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness yet. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But peace. The absence of fear. The knowledge that when I went to sleep that night, no one would hurt me or my child. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of Leo on the swings, his head thrown back, laughing at something another kid had said. The photo was a little blurry, slightly out of focus, but it was perfect. It captured a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I looked back through my camera roll, past the recent pictures of our new life, back to those dark photos I had taken that night in the bathroom, the swollen lips, the bruises, the evidence I had gathered in secret. I didn't delete them. They were part of our story, proof of where we had been and how far we had come, but I didn't look at them often anymore. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on the new pictures. Leo's first day at his new school, the two of us making pancakes in our tiny kitchen, the view from our apartment window. These were the images that mattered now. These were the memories we were building. That evening, after Leo was asleep, I sat at our secondhand dining table with my laptop open, working on an essay for my psychology class. The assignment was to write about resilience, about the factors that allow people to survive and overcome trauma. I wrote about silence and the courage it takes to break it. I wrote about the lies we tell ourselves to survive, and the truth we must face to truly live. I wrote about the importance of bearing witness to your own pain, of refusing to let others rewrite your story. But mostly, I wrote about hope, about the fact that even in the darkest moments, even when you are at your most broken, there is a part of you that knows you deserve better. A small voice that refuses to be silenced, no matter how many times someone tries to glue your mouth shut. I used to think that survival meant enduring, that strength meant taking pain without complaint. Now I knew better. Real strength was in the leaving. Real survival was in the rebuilding. Real courage was in the decision to say, "This ends now." As I finished writing, I heard Leo call out in his sleep. I went to his room and found him tangled in his blankets, making soft, distressed sounds. I gently untangled him and sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. His eyes opened slightly. "Mommy?" "I'm here, baby. You're safe." "Is he coming back?" We had been through this before. His therapist said the nightmares were normal, part of processing everything that had happened. "No," I said firmly. "He can never come back. I promise. You are safe. We are both safe." Leo nodded and closed his eyes again, his breathing evening out. I sat there for a while longer, watching him sleep, marveling at how peaceful he looked. How different from the frightened, careful child he had been just months ago. When I finally stood to leave, I paused in the doorway and looked back at him. My son. Safe. Free. Already starting to heal. In the living room, I picked up the letter from Mr. Davis that had arrived in the mail that morning. It was brief and professional, outlining the final details of the case, but at the bottom, he had added a handwritten note. "Sarah, you are one of the bravest people I have ever met. You saved yourself and your son. You built a case, piece by piece, while living in a situation that would have broken most people. You never gave up. I hope you are proud of yourself, because you should be. You won. Not just in court, but in life. Wishing you and Leo all the best, Peter Davis." I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer with other important documents. Proof not just of legal victory, but of the moment my life changed direction. The moment I decided I was worth saving. Outside, the city continued its evening routine. Cars passed on the street below. Somewhere, a dog barked. A neighbor's television murmured through the walls. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life, and to me, they were beautiful. I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of the city, thinking about everything that had led me here. The pain, yes, but also the strength I had found in myself that I never knew existed. The people who had helped me when I finally asked for help. The legal system that, this time, had worked the way it was supposed to. I thought about Frank in prison, finally facing consequences for his actions. I thought about Carol, stripped of her facade of respectability, revealed to her church and community for what she truly was. I didn't feel happy about their punishment exactly. I just felt finished with them. They had taken up so much space in my life for so long, and now they were just part of my past. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but mine to shape. I would finish my degree. I would continue working, and maybe eventually find a career I was passionate about. I would watch Leo grow up without fear. I would maybe someday learn to trust people again. Learn to believe that not all relationships were built on power and control. For now, though, it was enough to stand in this small apartment and know that we were safe. That the door had 3 locks and only we had the keys. That if Leo cried out in the night, I could comfort him without fear of someone telling me I was spoiling him. That I could speak my mind without wondering if my words would be literally sealed away. I touched my lips gently, feeling the faint scars that remained from that night. They would fade more with time, the doctor had said, but they might never disappear completely. That was okay. They were part of my story now, a reminder of what I had survived and overcome. My phone buzzed again. A text from Grace at the shelter. "How are you doing tonight?" She checked in regularly, part of their follow-up program for women who had left. I typed back quickly. "We're good, really good." "Proud of you," she responded, with a heart emoji. I smiled and set the phone down. Proud. It was a strange feeling, being proud of myself. For so long, I had defined my worth by other people's approval. Their judgment, Frank's anger, Carol's disappointment. They had been my measures of success or failure. Now, I was learning to be my own measure, to look in the mirror and see someone who had fought for herself and her child, someone who had been smart and brave and strong, even when she felt anything but. I sat back down at my laptop and opened a new document. I had been thinking about writing down everything that had happened, not just the court version, but the whole story. My story. Leo's therapist had suggested it might be helpful for processing everything. But more than that, I thought maybe someday it could help someone else who was living in their own nightmare, thinking there was no way out. I wanted to tell them that there is always a way. That it starts with the smallest acts of rebellion. Taking a photo, making a phone call, asking for help. That you don't have to wait until you feel brave to do brave things. That sometimes, you do the brave thing and the bravery follows. I began to type, starting with that rainy Thursday night, and the words flowed faster than I expected. It hurt to write it, to relive those moments, but it also felt cleansing somehow. Like I was taking back ownership of what had been done to me, transforming it from something that happened to me into something I had survived. Hours later, exhausted but lighter somehow, I saved the document and closed my laptop. The apartment was quiet. Leo slept peacefully in his room. The locks on the door were secure. Tomorrow, I would go to work, then come home and make dinner, help Leo with his homework, read him a story before bed. Ordinary things that felt extraordinary because they were ours, chosen and protected. I thought about that moment on the floor, my mouth sealed shut, Frank watching TV as if nothing had happened. In that moment, I had felt utterly powerless, completely broken. But I had been wrong. Even then, even in that awful moment, I had been planning. A part of me had already been refusing to accept this as my reality. That part of me had grown stronger every day since. She was the one who had planned our escape, who had gathered evidence, who had stood up in court and told the truth. She was the one who had kept going through the fear and doubt, who had believed we deserved better even when it seemed impossible. She was me. I was her. We were the same person, and I was learning to be proud of that person. As I finally got ready for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked different than I had 6 months ago. The scars on my lips had faded to thin white lines. The darkness under my eyes was gone. I looked rested. I looked okay. More than okay, actually. I looked like someone who had survived. Like someone who had fought and won. Like someone who knew her own strength now. I smiled at my reflection. A real smile. The kind that reached my eyes. "We did it," I whispered to the woman in the mirror. "We actually did it." And for the first time in years, I genuinely liked the person looking back at me. She had saved herself. She had saved her son. She had found her voice and refused to let anyone silence it again. The next morning was Saturday. Leo and I had fallen into a weekend routine. We would make breakfast together, then spend the day exploring our new city or just hanging out at home. This Saturday, we decided on the zoo. As we rode the bus across town, Leo pressed his face against the window, excited about seeing the elephants. He had been talking about them all week, ever since his teacher had shown the class a documentary about African wildlife. "Do you think they'll remember us from last time?" he asked, his breath fogging up the glass. "Maybe," I said, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Elephants have very good memories." "Like you, Mommy, you remember everything." His words hit me harder than he could know. Yes, I remembered everything. Every moment of fear, every word of cruelty, every time I had swallowed my voice to keep the peace. But I also remembered the moments of clarity, the small acts of courage that had built up to our escape, the feeling of driving away from that house for the last time. At the zoo, we spent hours wandering from exhibit to exhibit. Leo was fearless now in a way he had never been before, running ahead to the next enclosure, calling back to me with excitement. He made friends with other children easily, something he had been too anxious to do before. I watched him share his snacks with a little girl who was crying because she had dropped hers, saw him help a smaller boy reach the viewing window to see the penguins. He was learning what kindness looked like, what it meant to help someone without expecting anything in return, without fear of punishment for doing something wrong. He was unlearning the lessons Frank and Carol had tried to teach him about power and control. During lunch at the zoo cafe, Leo looked at me seriously over his peanut butter sandwich. "Mommy, at school," Tyler said, his dad yells a lot and it makes him scared. I told him about how we left because it's not okay when people hurt you. Was that right? My heart clenched. I reached across the table and took his small hand. That was exactly right, sweetheart. You told him the truth. Sometimes people need to know that they don't have to stay somewhere that hurts them. Do you think Tyler will be okay? I hope so. Maybe you telling him that made him feel less alone. Leo nodded thoughtfully, then went back to his sandwich. But I sat there for a moment longer, overwhelmed by the realization that my son, at 6 years old, was already learning to recognize abuse and speak out against it. He would grow up knowing that violence was never acceptable, that fear was not the same as respect, that love should never hurt. That alone made everything worth it. On the bus ride home, Leo fell asleep against my shoulder, worn out from the day's adventures. I watched the city pass by the window, thinking about how different this life was from the one I had imagined for myself years ago. When I married Frank, I had been so young, barely 20. I thought I was in love. I thought his jealousy meant he cared, that his need to control where I went and who I saw was protectiveness. My mother had told me that marriage required sacrifice, that a good wife put her husband first, that maintaining peace in the home was a woman's responsibility. I had believed her because I didn't know any different. Carol had raised me with the same methods Frank used on Leo. The punishments, the isolation, the constant criticism disguised as discipline. I had grown up thinking that was normal, that every family operated on fear and control. It wasn't until I had Leo that I began to question things. When he was born and I held him for the first time, I felt a love so fierce and protective that it changed something fundamental in me. I looked at this tiny, perfect person and thought about raising him the way I had been raised, and something inside me recoiled. But by then, I was already trapped. Frank had isolated me from the few friends I'd had. We lived in Carol's house after she was widowed, so I had no financial independence. I had dropped out of college when I got pregnant. I had no job, no money, nowhere to go. And Frank had made it clear, many times, what would happen if I tried to leave. So I had stayed. And told myself I was doing it for Leo, that it was better for a child to have both parents, that I could shield him from the worst of it. But I couldn't. Frank's violence had eventually turned toward Leo too, just as I should have known it would. That night with the glue had been the breaking point, but it hadn't been the first incident. It had just been the worst, the one that finally broke through my denial and forced me to admit that staying was more dangerous than leaving. Back at our apartment, I tucked Leo into bed and sat with him while he drifted off to sleep. His room was small but cozy, filled with things he had chosen himself. Posters of dinosaurs on the walls, a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, books stacked on the shelf that we read together every night. In the old house, his room had been barely furnished, painted a dull beige because Frank said bright colors were for babies. Leo had been afraid to put anything on the walls without permission, afraid of making holes in the plaster, afraid of doing anything that might anger Frank. Now, his walls were covered with his artwork, his collections, his personality. He was allowed to be a child here. He was allowed to make noise and mess and mistakes without fear. After Leo was asleep, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the small balcony off our living room. It overlooked an alley and a parking lot. Nothing scenic, but I loved it anyway. It was mine. I could sit here in peace, watching the evening settle over the city, and no one would bother me. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but then I saw it was Mrs. Henderson. We had stayed in touch after the trial. She had been such an important part of our escape that I felt bonded to her in a way that was hard to explain. "Sarah, dear, I hope I'm not calling too late," she said when I answered. "Not at all. How are you?" "I'm well. I wanted to tell you something. Today at the grocery store, I ran into Janet from the church. You know, the one who used to organize the bake sales?" I made an encouraging sound. Mrs. Henderson loved to tell stories in her own time. "Well, she told me that Carol hasn't been back to church since the trial. Apparently, after everything came out, people started remembering things. Little incidents they had ignored or explained away. The way she spoke to people. The cruel comments disguised as jokes. One woman said Carol had made her daughter cry at a church picnic years ago, but at the time, she just thought Carol was having a bad day. "What made you want to tell me this?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "Because I wanted you to know that people see her now. really see her. She doesn't get to play the victim anymore. The whole community knows what she did to you and Leo. She's facing consequences, in her own way. I thought that might give you some peace. It did, surprisingly. I had worried sometimes that Carol would spin the story, make herself the wronged party, the grandmother cruelly separated from her grandson. Knowing that people saw through her facade, that her reputation was ruined in the community she had cared so much about, felt like a form of justice all its own. Thank you for telling me, I said sincerely. It does help. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet evening air and thought about Carol. Part of me felt sorry for her, this old woman who had driven away her only child, who would die alone and unloved because she had been too cruel to inspire anything else. But mostly, I felt nothing. She had made her choices. She had chosen cruelty over compassion, control over love, pride over family. Those were her burdens to carry now, not mine. The weeks turned into months. Leo thrived in school, bringing home artwork and stories about his friends. I completed more classes, getting closer to my degree. I started attending a support group for domestic violence survivors, where I met other women who understood what I had been through in ways that no one else could. One woman, Maria, had escaped with 3 children and rebuilt her life from nothing. Another, Jennifer, was still in the early stages, still jumping at shadows, still convinced her ex-husband would find her. I saw myself in both of them, the person I had been and the person I was becoming. We shared our stories in those meetings, and I always emphasized the importance of documentation. Take pictures? I would tell them. Record everything you can safely record. Build your case quietly. You are stronger than you know, and there is a way out. Some of them looked at me with such hope in their eyes that it broke my heart. Others looked skeptical, too beaten down to believe escape was possible. I understood both reactions. I had felt both things myself. One evening, about 8 months after we had left, I came home from work to find an envelope that had been slipped under our door. My heart raced, immediately fearing the worst. Was it from Frank somehow? Had someone found us? With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a card with flowers on the front. The message inside read, "Thank you for being brave enough to show me that leaving was possible. You saved my life, a grateful neighbor." It wasn't signed, and I never found out who had written it. But I kept that card in my desk drawer, and on hard days, I would take it out and read it. Someone's life had been changed because I had been willing to share my story. That meant something. As Leo's 7th birthday approached, he asked if he could have a party with his friends from school. In the old house, birthdays had been tense affairs. Frank would complain about the expense, Carol would criticize my cake baking abilities, and Leo would try so hard to be grateful for whatever minimal celebration we managed that it broke my heart. "Of course you can have a party," I told him. "We can have it at the park. You can invite whoever you want." His face lit up in a way that made my eyes sting with tears. "Really? Can we have pizza and a piñata?" "We can have whatever you want, baby. It's your day." The party was chaotic and loud and perfect. 10 children running around the park, high on sugar and excitement. Parents I had gotten to know over the months, kind people who had welcomed us into their community without judgment. Leo's teacher even stopped by with a gift, telling me how much she enjoyed having Leo in her class, how much he had grown since the beginning of the school year. I watched Leo laughing with his friends, covered in cake and grass stains, and felt a happiness so profound it was almost painful. This was what childhood should look like. This was what I had been fighting for. That night, after Leo was asleep, I sat down to write in the journal I had started keeping. My therapist had suggested it as a way to process everything that had happened. At first, I had been reluctant, afraid that writing it down would make it more real somehow, but I had found the opposite was true. Writing helped me make sense of things, helped me see how far I had come. I wrote about the party, about Leo's joy, about the community we had built. Then I wrote about fear, about how it still lived in me sometimes, showing up in unexpected moments. How I still sometimes woke in the night, heart pounding, certain I heard Frank's voice. How I still flinched at loud noises, still felt my body tense when someone raised their voice, even in a context that had nothing to do with me. Trauma doesn't just disappear because you escape its source. It lives in your body, in your instincts, in the pathways your brain carved out to help you survive. Healing was not linear. There were good days and bad days, steps forward and backward. But the difference now was that I had tools to cope. I had therapy. I had support. I had the knowledge that I was safe, and that knowledge made it possible to do the work of healing. A year after we left, I received another letter from Mr. Davis. Frank had been denied parole in his first hearing. The judge had cited the severity of his crimes and his lack of remorse. He would remain in prison for the foreseeable future. I felt relieved but also strangely empty. I had thought that Frank being locked away would feel like more of a victory, but instead, it just felt like the closing of a chapter. He was where he belonged. We were safe. That was all that mattered. Around the same time, I graduated with my associate's degree. It was a small ceremony at the community college, nothing fancy, but Leo was there in the audience with my friend Maria from the support group, and when they called my name, I heard them both cheering louder than anyone. Walking across that stage to receive my diploma, I thought about all the times Frank had told me I was too stupid for school, all the times Carol had said education was wasted on me. I had let their voices become my inner voice, their judgment become my truth. Not anymore. I had proved them wrong. I had proved myself right. After the ceremony, Leo ran up to me with a bouquet of flowers he and Maria had picked out. "I'm so proud of you, Mommy," he said, and I knelt down to hug him, not caring that I was crying in front of everyone. "I'm proud of us," I told him. "We did this together." Because we had. Every choice I had made, every risk I had taken, had been for him as much as for me. We had saved each other. As Leo got older, I knew there would come a time when he would want to know more about why we had left, about what his father and grandmother had done. His therapist said to answer his questions honestly, but age-appropriately, to never lie, but to be mindful of what details he was ready to hear. So far, he seemed content knowing that his father had hurt us and that we had left to be safe. He didn't ask many questions about Frank, though occasionally he would mention something from the old house, testing the waters to see if it was okay to talk about. I always let him lead those conversations, never pushing but always open. "You can talk to me about anything," I would remind him. "The past, the present, anything at all, I'm here." One evening, about 18 months after we left, Leo came to me with a drawing he had made. It showed our old house with dark clouds over it, and then our new apartment with a bright sun and rainbow. Between the two buildings was a figure that I recognized as me, holding a smaller figure that was him, both of us with smiles on our faces. "This is us leaving," he explained. "We were sad there, but then you took us to the happy place." I pulled him close, overwhelmed with emotion. "You know what, baby? You helped take us there too. You were so brave. You're the bravest person I know." He looked up at me with those wise, old eyes. "When I grow up, I want to help people like you helped us." "You can be anything you want," I told him, "and I know you'll be amazing at whatever you choose." Life continued to unfold in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. I applied for a full-time position at the library and got it, complete with benefits and better pay. I started taking classes toward my bachelor's degree. Leo joined the soccer team at school and discovered he loved it. We made friends, built routines, created traditions. Every morning, we would have breakfast together and talk about our plans for the day. Every evening, we would have dinner and share our favorite moments. Every night, I would read to him before bed, even though he was getting old enough to read on his own. He said he liked hearing my voice. Sometimes, people from our past would surface unexpectedly. Once, I ran into someone who had gone to high school with Frank. She recognized me at the grocery store and started to approach with a smile. The smile faded, replaced by awkwardness and pity. "Sarah, I heard about everything. I'm so sorry. I never knew he was like that." "Most people didn't," I said simply. "He was good at hiding it." She hesitated, then asked, "How are you doing now?" I looked down at Leo, who was carefully selecting apples and putting them in our cart, completely absorbed in making sure we got the best ones. "We're doing well," I said. "Really well." It was the truth. We were well in a way that had nothing to do with money or status or any external measure. We were well because we were safe and free and learning how to be happy. The second anniversary of our escape came and went quietly. I marked it in my journal but didn't make a big deal of it. It was just another day in our new life, and that felt right. Our life wasn't defined by what we had left behind anymore. It was defined by what we were building. I still had moments of doubt and fear. I still sometimes wondered if I could have done things differently, left sooner, protected Leo better. My therapist reminded me that those thoughts were normal, but that I needed to be kind to myself. I had done the best I could with the resources and knowledge I had at the time. I had gotten us out. I had saved us. That was what mattered. One Saturday afternoon, Leo and I were at the park when I noticed him watching a father playing with his young daughter. The man was pushing her on the swings, and she was laughing delightedly. Leo's expression was hard to read, a mix of wistfulness and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Leo?" I asked gently, sitting down next to him on the bench. "What are you thinking about?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't really remember him much anymore. Is that bad?" My heart ached. "No, sweetheart, that's not bad at all. It's okay to forget. It's okay to remember too. Whatever you feel is okay." "I'm not sad he's gone," Leo said, still watching the father and daughter. "Does that make me a bad person?" I put my arm around him and pulled him close. "You are not a bad person. You're a wonderful person with a kind heart. It's okay not to miss someone who hurt you. You don't owe him anything, not even your sadness." "Sometimes I get mad at him," Leo admitted in a small voice, "for hurting you, for hurting me, for making us scared all the time. That's okay too. Anger is a normal feeling. What he did was wrong, and it's natural to feel angry about it. But you taught me that it's not okay to hurt people when you're angry. That's right, feeling angry is okay. How you express that anger is what matters. You can be angry without being cruel. You can protect yourself without becoming like the people who hurt you. Leo nodded slowly, processing this. Then he asked, "Do you think I'll be like him when I grow up?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in mine. "Leo, listen to me. You are nothing like him. You are kind and gentle and thoughtful. You care about other people's feelings, you help your friends when they're sad, you apologize when you make mistakes. You are good, Leo. All the way through, you are good." "How do you know?" "Because I see it every single day. In the way you treat people. In the choices you make. In the person you're becoming. You are not your father. You never will be." He leaned against me, and we sat like that for a while, watching the other families in the park. Eventually, one of his friends showed up and called him over to play. He ran off, his moment of worry seemingly forgotten, but I knew it would come up again. These were the questions he would grapple with as he grew older, the legacy of what he had experienced. But I also knew he would be okay. He had the tools, the support, the love that I hadn't had at his age. He would grow up knowing that violence was a choice, not an inevitability. That he could break the cycle. That he was in control of the person he became. As the seasons changed and time moved forward, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the future. I thought about the career I might build, the places Leo and I might travel when we saved enough money, the life we could create for ourselves. I started dating, tentatively, terrified at first. The first man I went out with was nice enough, but when he reached across the table to hold my hand during dinner, I flinched so hard I knocked over my water glass. He was understanding, but I knew it wasn't going to work. I wasn't ready. The second man I dated was more patient. David was a teacher at Leo's school, and we had gotten to know each other over several months before he asked me out. He knew about my past, knew about Frank and the trial. He moved slowly, respected my boundaries, never pushed. Our first real date was a disaster. I was so anxious that I couldn't eat, kept checking my phone compulsively, jumped at every sudden noise. Afterward, I apologized profusely, certain he would never want to see me again. Instead, he smiled kindly and said, "Sarah, I'm not going anywhere. We can take this as slowly as you need. There's no pressure, no expectations. I just enjoy spending time with you." It took almost 6 months before I could kiss him without tensing up, another 3 months before I could let him meet Leo outside of school functions. David was patient through all of it, never making me feel broken or damaged, always reminding me that healing wasn't linear and that there was no timeline I needed to follow. Leo liked him, which mattered more to me than anything. "He's nice, Mommy," Leo told me after David had come over for dinner one evening. "He doesn't yell, he says please and thank you, and he thinks my drawings are good." Those simple observations from my son's perspective made me realize how much Leo's normal meter had been recalibrated. He no longer saw kindness as exceptional, he saw it as baseline, as what he deserved. That meant everything. 2 years after we left, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a woman named Rachel, who worked for a nonprofit organization that supported domestic violence survivors. She had heard about my case through Mr. Davis, and wanted to know if I would be interested in speaking at one of their fundraising events. My first instinct was to say no. The thought of standing in front of people and talking about what I had been through made my stomach twist with anxiety. But then I thought about that anonymous card that had been slipped under my door, about the woman at the support group who had told me my story gave her hope. "What would you want me to talk about?" I asked. "Your experience, but also your survival. How you planned, how you documented, how you got out. So many women think there's no way to leave safely. Your story could show them that it's possible." I agreed, though I regretted it immediately afterward. The event was 2 months away, and I spent that entire time alternating between writing and rewriting my speech and wanting to cancel. The night of the event, I stood backstage with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, wondering what I had been thinking. David was in the audience with Leo, who had insisted on coming to support me. Mrs. Henderson was there too, sitting in the front row with a proud smile on her face. When they called my name, I walked out onto the stage and looked at the sea of faces. I saw women like me, women who had survived. I saw people who worked in the field, who dedicated their lives to helping others escape violence. I saw Leo, giving me an encouraging thumbs up. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about Frank and Carol, though I didn't use their real names. I told them about the escalation, about the night with the glue. I told them about my planning, the secret documentation, the patient gathering of evidence. I told them about the fear and the doubt, about almost giving up so many times. But I also told them about the moment I decided to leave, about the strength I found that I didn't know I had. I told them about building a new life, about healing, about learning to be happy again. I told them that survival was possible, that there was life after abuse, that they were stronger than they knew. When I finished, the applause was overwhelming. Several women were crying. One stood up, and then another, until the entire audience was on their feet. I stood there, overwhelmed, realizing that my pain had purpose. That by sharing what I had been through, I might help someone else find their way out. Afterward, several women came up to me privately. One pressed a piece of paper into my hand with her phone number. "I'm still there," she whispered. "Still stuck, but hearing you talk made me think maybe I could do it too." "You can," I told her firmly, "and when you're ready, call me. I'll help however I can." That night became the first of many. I started speaking regularly at events, at support groups, at shelters. I shared my story over and over, and each time I told it, it hurt a little less. The memories lost some of their power over me as I transformed them into a tool to help others. Leo grew older, becoming more himself with each passing year. He was smart and kind, with a dry sense of humor that made me laugh. He did well in school, had good friends, played sports. He was just a regular kid, which was everything I had wanted for him. Sometimes, usually late at night when he thought I was asleep, I would hear him in his room talking to his therapist on the phone during his teletherapy sessions. He would talk about his memories of the old house, about his fears and worries, about the nightmares that still came sometimes. But he was processing it, working through it, not letting it define him. On Leo's 10th birthday, 3 years after we had left, he asked me if he could change his last name. "I don't want to have his name anymore," he said. "Can I have your name instead?" We went through the legal process, and the day the judge approved the name change, Leo smiled bigger than I had ever seen. "Now I'm really me," he said. I understood what he meant. He was shedding the last visible connection to Frank, claiming his identity as his own. It was another step in his healing, another way of taking control of his narrative. As for me, I continued to build my life piece by piece. I completed my bachelor's degree and was accepted into a master's program in social work. I wanted to work with domestic violence survivors professionally, to turn my experience into expertise that could help others systematically, not just through occasional speaking events. My relationship with David deepened slowly, carefully. He proposed after we had been together for 2 years, and I said yes, though I made it clear we would have a long engagement. I needed time to be sure, to trust that this was real and safe and good. Leo was thrilled when I told him. "Does this mean David will be my dad?" he asked. "He'll be your stepdad," I clarified. "If that's what you want, you don't have to call him dad if you don't feel comfortable with that." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. There's no rush for anything. We're all just going to keep being a family together, okay?" Eventually, Leo did start calling David Dad, and hearing him say it so naturally, so easily, with no fear or tension, made me cry happy tears. He had a father figure who was gentle and patient, who taught him things and listened to him, who showed him what healthy masculinity looked like. 4 years after we left, I was working at a domestic violence shelter as part of my graduate program internship. One day, a woman came in with 2 young children. She was bruised and terrified, jumping at every sound. I sat with her as she told her story, which was horrifyingly similar to mine. When she finished, she looked at me with exhausted eyes. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to start over." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I know exactly how you feel. I was sitting in a chair like yours 4 years ago, and I promise you, it is possible to build a new life. It's hard, and it's scary, but it's worth it." "How do you know?" "Because I did it, and now I'm here to help you do it too." Over the following weeks, I worked with her and her children, helping them access resources, connecting them with legal aid, supporting them through the process of building a case against her abuser. I saw myself in her, saw the fear and hope and determination. I saw her grow stronger each day as she realized she was capable of more than she thought. The day she moved into her own apartment, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you for showing me it was possible," she said. "You did the hard part," I told her. "You made the choice to leave. You saved yourself and your kids. I just helped with the logistics." "No," she said firmly. "You gave me hope. That was everything." I thought about that a lot afterward, about how hope could be the difference between staying and leaving, between surviving and thriving. About how sharing my story, as painful as it sometimes was, could light a path for someone else in the darkness. 5 years after we left, Leo and I went back to the town where we had lived with Frank and Carol. Not to the house, but to the cemetery. My father, Carol's husband, was buried there, and I had never properly said goodbye. I hadn't seen Carol since the trial. I knew from Mrs. Henderson that she still lived in the area, though she had moved to a smaller apartment after the house was seized. She lived alone, estranged from the few relatives we had, her reputation in ruins. Part of me wondered if she ever regretted what she had done, if she ever reflected on the choices that had led to her isolation. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. She had become irrelevant to my life. A chapter closed and finished. At my father's grave, I stood quietly while Leo played nearby. I didn't remember Dad. Well, he had died when I was young. But I wondered sometimes what he would think of everything that had happened, if he had known how Carol treated me and chosen to ignore it, or if he had been kept in the dark. "I got out, Dad," I whispered to the headstone. "Leo and I both did. We're safe now. We're happy. I hope that matters to you, wherever you are." On the drive home, Leo asked, "Do you think she ever thinks about us?" He meant Carol. We didn't talk about her often, but she existed in the background of our story, an uncomfortable truth we couldn't erase. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. Or maybe she's convinced herself that she was right and we were wrong. Some people never change, never see their own cruelty." "I'm glad we left," Leo said quietly. "Me too, baby. Me too." The years continued to pass. Leo went to middle school, then high school. He grew tall and strong, played basketball, got good grades, had his first girlfriend. He was thoughtful and mature beyond his years, which I knew was partly because of what he had been through, but he was also joyful and hopeful, which was despite it. I married David in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Leo walked me down the aisle, proud and protective. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire ceremony. It was perfect in its simplicity, a celebration of the life we had built and the future we were creating. My work with domestic violence survivors became my career. I got my master's degree and was hired by the same organization where I had interned. I helped hundreds of women over the years, each one teaching me something new about strength and resilience and hope. Some of them made it out, some of them went back, some of them didn't survive. The work was heartbreaking and exhausting and the most meaningful thing I had ever done. I understood their fear intimately, their hesitation, their hope. I could look them in the eye and say, "I know, I've been there, and I'm here to tell you that you can survive this." When Leo graduated from high school, I sat in the audience with David and cried as they called his name. He had been accepted to a good university on a partial scholarship. He wanted to study psychology, to work with children who had experienced trauma. My boy, my brave, compassionate boy, was going to help heal other broken children. At his graduation party, he gave a speech thanking David and me for showing him what love was supposed to look like. "My mom taught me that strength isn't about being the loudest or the most powerful," he said. "It's about protecting the people you love, even when you're scared. It's about knowing when to walk away from people who hurt you. It's about building a life that makes you happy instead of staying in one that breaks you." I couldn't stop crying. This beautiful young man, who had started life in such darkness, was now light itself. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on our back porch with a cup of tea and thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that terrible night with the glue to this moment of celebration and joy. It had been nearly a decade, and sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago, and sometimes it felt like yesterday. I still had scars, visible and invisible. I still had moments of fear, times when a raised voice or sudden movement would send my heart racing. But I also had peace, I had love, I had purpose. I had proven to myself that I was strong enough to save myself and my son, that I was worthy of a better life, that my voice mattered, even when someone tried to silence it. The glue had been removed from my lips within days, but it had taken years to remove it from my spirit, to believe that I was allowed to speak, to express myself, to take up space in the world. Now, my voice was my power. I used it to advocate for others, to share my story, to speak truth to power. Every time I gave a talk, every time I helped a woman create a safety plan, every time I testified about the need for better protective services, I was proving that Frank's attempt to silence me had failed. I looked up at the stars, feeling grateful in a way that was almost overwhelming. Grateful for Mrs. Henderson, for Mr. Davis, for Grace at the shelter, for David, for every person who had helped us along the way, but mostly, I was grateful for myself, for the woman who had decided, in her darkest moment, that she deserved better, for the mother who had found the strength to save her child, for the survivor who had become a thriver. Inside the house, I could hear Leo and David laughing about something. The sound of that laughter, free and genuine and safe, was everything I had fought for. It was worth every moment of pain, every night of fear, every difficult choice. I took a sip of my tea and smiled. We had made it. Against all odds, through all the darkness, we had made it to the other side. And on the other side, there was light.